If you've ever felt like you met your divine partner, your twin flame, and it turned into the most agonizing, soul-crushing relationship of your life, what you're about to hear is not going to comfort you. I'm not here to tell you to hold on or that the separation is part of the divine plan. I'm here because at some point, the truth is the only thing that can actually set you free. To be honest, I used to think that the twin flame trap was only for the naive, but when this storm hit me, I was 37 and I wasn't some lost girl. I was a woman with 3 degrees, a career that touched a Nobel Peace Prize, a survivor of war, of bankruptcy, recently recovered from a tumor. By that time, I had spent 3 years in deep therapy, stripping myself to the bone. After a long list of failed relationships, I wasn't looking for anyone. I actually truly enjoyed my solitude. I was deep into Jungian psychology, religions, and mysticism. I was studying everything from tarot to chakra healing and lucid dreaming, and I had just launched a podcast on Vedic knowledge that hit 1.5 million views in its first year. I felt solid, I felt whole, and it was in that perfect, ringing silence that he appeared. It wasn't just liking someone, it was a recognition so violent it made my head spin. We would talk for 10 hours straight, and it felt like 10 minutes. When we talked about God, consciousness, meaning of life, he didn't just understand me, he was finishing my thoughts. The telepathy was insane. We lived in different countries, yet every time we would meditate together, I could feel the air in the room thicken. I felt his presence on my skin. Synchronicities were everywhere, 11:11 or 22:22 on every clock. All the readers and channelers I encountered online told me the same thing. He is the one, he is your future husband. When he finally asked me, does this feel like twin flames to you? I didn't just agree, I felt like the universe was finally screaming my name. For the first time, I felt seen in my absolute essence. Well, except for the times when he would suddenly disappear. For days, weeks, even a month. Every time we got too close, he would vanish. He'd evaporate after the tiniest bit of friction, leaving me in a vacuum where the oxygen had been sucked out. I excused his behavior by telling myself stories about his difficult childhood, but I lived through little deaths every few months. I called it a karmic lesson. I blamed myself. I thought I'm too proud or I'm not patient enough for this divine love. And after days of crying in bed and endless self-reflection on what I did wrong, I'd gather my broken pieces and crawl back to my creative work. Writing and podcasting were the only things that brought me back to life. In fact, it was during those dark periods that I wrote 2 books, and every time I finally felt back on track, he'd magically reappear. I thought it was a miracle. I thought God was showing me favor, giving me another chance with my divine partner. Little did I know I was just recharged enough to be a source of food again. It took me a full year to wake up to the fact that what I treated as a sacred union was a narcissist dynamic by the book. And not just any narcissist, but the most sophisticated form, the spiritual narcissist. I used to believe it was his presence that inspired me and linked me to the divine, but in fact it was his absence that taught me the truth. It revealed that energy, something that can only be born within, was never meant to be poured into the hollow ego of another. It was meant for creativity, for art, and for the service of others. In that sense, encountering a narcissist, especially the spiritual kind, is a brutal yet vital initiation. The lesson of the stage is to realize that the prophet you've been seeking out there has always been inside you. The narcissist appears in your life only to show you that you've been looking for a savior outside of yourself. Healing is simply seeing this, seeing the repeating pattern, seeing the value of energy carried by the vessel of your body, and seeing the other for who they are, not the image you desperately wanted them to be. The hardest part when seeing that is choosing to believe it. Suddenly every memory and every word is cast in a completely different light, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. At that point, living is the only thing left to do. You cannot stay once the illusion is gone. You cannot consciously choose to remain in a cycle of psychological violence. Now, let me be clear, not every connection labeled as a twin flame is a narcissistic dynamic, but every relationship that follows a runner-chaser pattern is dysfunctional, period. If you are in a cycle of constant separation, turbulence and obsession, you are in a dysfunctional relationship. I'm sharing this not as a confession, but as a roadmap, because what is labeled today as a twin flame connection is often just trauma dressed up in mystical robes. And while this type of connection might seem like the ultimate end game, it's actually just a sign of a specific stage of your healing. I am not diminishing the significance of what you might be experiencing. The intensity is real, but we need to see it accurately. And to find the exit from this loop, we first need to deconstruct the twin flame myth itself. The truth is, this narrative isn't yours. It's been scripted for you. Since childhood, we're conditioned to believe that love is a puzzle, that we are halves, wandering the earth until we find that one person who completes us. This illusion is extraordinarily well defended. It's reinforced by every film, every song, and every story that places the climax of human life at the moment two people choose each other across a crowded room. We've been taught that obsession, intensity, and emotional roller coasters are the hallmarks of a divine connection. We tell ourselves it hurts this much because it's meant to be. But what if that pain isn't a sign of depth, but a warning of a trap? The twin flame concept has saturated modern spiritual culture so completely that most people treat it as ancient wisdom. It is not. The term itself is recent. The entire belief system, the runner and chaser dynamic, the separation phases, the idea that turbulence and obsession are signs of a sacred bond, is a modern construction. I sincerely believed it myself, but it's dysfunction dressed in mystical language to make it feel fated. The truth is, this is a rebranding of ancient concepts like Plato's Androgynous myth or the Vedic divine couple, but stripped of their true spiritual purpose. In the symposium, Plato describes human beings as originally spherical creatures, complete in themselves, who were split in two by gods for becoming too powerful. Since that split, each half wanders the earth searching for its match. When they find each other, they cling together with a need that ordinary logic cannot explain. But Plato presented this as myth, not as literal cosmology. He was describing the psychological experience of Eros, the force that moves through you when you encounter someone who reflects something deep and unfinished back at you. The Greeks understood Eros as a god, but not a benevolent one. Eros arrives unbidden. He destabilizes. Eros is not a pleasant addition to a life already in order. Eros is an interruption. He undoes the careful structure of the life you've built. But he doesn't do this to punish you. He does it because the psyche requires it. Because something in you cannot grow without first being undone. The question is not whether you will experience this force. You already have or you will. The question is whether you understand what it's asking of you. Are you willing to pay what love, not Eros, actually costs? Christian mysticism later clarified this difference through the concepts of Eros and Agape. Eros is a passionate, hungry love driven by the soul's desperate longing to possess what it lacks. It is fire, it is beautiful, but it is also an extraction, a search for completion through the other that inevitably leads to burnout and suffering. Agape is different. Agape is a love of pure presence and unconditional gift. It is a descending love that doesn't need to take because it is already full. While Eros is the storm that initiates the seeker, Agape is the quiet light that remains once the storm has passed. It's the shift from needing someone to feel alive to being so alive that your love becomes a safe space for another to simply exist. Carl Jung mapped the same territory from the inside of the psyche. He identified the Anima and the Animus, the contrasexual images in psyche that every person carries in their unconscious. The Animus in a woman is the masculine principle that shapes her perception of men, a perception she mistakes for love when she projects it outward. And vice versa for man, the Anima is the feminine principle that shapes his perception of women, which he mistakes for love when he projects it outward. When you meet someone and project this powerful image onto them, it feels like recognition. It feels like the universe has arranged a meeting. The intensity is real. The sense of fatedness is real. But what is not real is the origin of that feeling. What you are recognizing in that person is not them. It is yourself. Specifically, it's the parts of yourself that have lived in the dark because they were never given room to grow in the light. You are seeing your own unlived interior life projected onto another human being. The intensity you feel is the intensity of your own unconscious demanding to finally be met. And what is labeled as twin flames is essentially the final meeting before this inner integration takes place. The twin flame encounter is not about meeting the one. It is a meeting with yourself. Because true love is what you feel when you have claimed all your parts and no longer need anyone else to feel whole. The experience of twin flames, therefore, is not the end goal. It's a preparation tool. It is meant to prepare your physical, mental, and emotional vessel to open up the source of love that can only be experienced from within. Christian mystics could say that what we call the twin flame obsession is a manifestation of Eros, which precedes Agape. In other words, a twin flame connection is not love, it is the preparation for love. Jung identified 4 stages of this process. 3 of them are manifestation of Eros, romantical stages, preparing you for the 4th, where you can finally experience Agape. The problem is that our attachment to the image of sacred love keeps us stuck in the preparation, preventing us from ever reaching the destination. To understand why we get stuck in this loop, we have to look at 4 stages of psychological healing based on Carl Jung's map of Anima and Animus. I've discussed this in detail in a previous episode, which I'll link for you, but here is a quick recap. Stage 1 is biological. We project our inner opposite as a figure of survival, a protector, a provider, or a domestic stabilizer. Stage 2 is romantic idealization. We look for a trophy, a social success, or someone to build a perfect, stable home with. Stage 3 is where the explosion happens. This is where the most powerful projection of your unconscious hits the other person. You don't see a human being, you see a mirror of God. This is precisely where the twin flame trap awaits. Finally, stage 4 is the inner union. The projection dissolves because the psyche has integrated its disowned parts. You finally see the other for exactly who they are, without the fog of your own needs. In my case, the stage 3 projection landed on a spiritual narcissist. A narcissist is someone with superinflated ego that is entirely dependent on external validation. They are hollow, and because they are hollow, they must extract energy from others to feel alive. The spiritual narcissist is the ultimate hook for stage 3 because they skillfully mirror the divine. They reflect your highest qualities, your search for meaning, and your own light back at you with such precision that you think you found home. But they aren't a home, they are a vacuum. If you are in stage 3 dynamic with a narcissist, you will notice 3 clear signs. First is depletion. After being with them, you feel drained rather than inspired and need some time alone to recharge. When you're apart, your energy goes to them, obsessing, checking their social media, or looking for channeled messages on YouTube instead of going to your own life or your art. Second is gaslighting. Your reality is constantly corrected. They explain your feelings to you from a place of perceived spiritual superiority, calling your pain just your ego or low vibration. Third is the weaponization of work. They use your commitment to self-awareness against you. They expect you to take 100% responsibility for their destructive behavior, framing it as your shadow work or your need to be more compassionate. This dynamic often masks itself as light, but there is a massive difference between what can be called a false light and a true light. The false light is the light of the ego. It is intense, hierarchical, and full of tension. It requires you to reach, to be better, to prove you're worthy. It's an adrenaline rush followed by a crash. The true light is the light of presence. It feels like relaxation. It is silent. It's not an extraction. It is a resting. It is a space where you don't have to become someone else to be loved. We study this extreme narcissist-empath dynamic because it reveals the mechanism of projection in its clearest form. When you project an image of God on a hollow person, you aren't just in a bad relationship. You are in spiritual crisis. You are giving your power to a mirror, and the only way out is to shatter the mirror and claim the light as your own. Having said that, let's be incredibly clear, a stage 3 projection does not always involve a spiritual narcissist. In fact, a narcissist can appear as the bearer of your projection at almost any stage except for the last one, stage 4. At its essence, narcissism is simply a superinflated ego. Every human being has an ego, which means that many of us carry narcissistic traits. It is always a matter of proportion. But a true narcissist has an ego so dependent on external validation that it must inflict suffering on others just to extract the energy it needs to survive. This is why the spiritual narcissist is the ultimate hook for this specific stage of healing. Why? Because they have a hollow ego that starves for confirmation of its own exceptionalism, while you have a deep unmet longing to find God outside of yourself. When you project the image of God onto them, you are giving their ego the ultimate source of validation, the highest high an ego can experience. But it is still just a projection. They are only mirrors. They reflect your unowned parts back at you with such terrifying precision that you are convinced you finally found God. But here is the hard truth. God cannot be found out there, not in another person, not in a guru or religious prophet, and certainly not in a twin flame, not in mystical entities, walls of particular buildings, or sacred rituals. As long as you perceive, speak to, or relate to God as something separate from yourself, you remain trapped in the illusions of the ego. If you want to dive deeper into this, see my podcast called God is Not What You Think. Healing begins the moment you take that projection back. You reach a point where you realize everything you were chasing in another person, the depth, the divinity, the missing piece, actually lives within you. This is conjuncture, the sacred internal marriage. You stop needing a complement because you have integrated your own inner masculine and feminine principles. You become your own source. The twin flame loop loses its power because you no longer need a mirror to reflect your unmet needs back to you. Let's be incredibly clear about another issue There is no such thing as true or false twin flame. Any relationship built on push-pull dynamic is, at its core, dysfunctional. It doesn't matter how many synchronicities you see. If it causes you suffering, it is not a relationship with another person. It is a relationship with your own projection. The terms true or false twins still imply that someone out there is designed to complete you. That is still a projection. The goal of healing is to withdraw those projections entirely. What remains after the fog clears? One of two paths. Either the slow, beautiful emergence of genuine love, a bond between people who have survived the dissolution of their projections. This love is built on something entirely different from the force that first brought them together. It is possible and it is profound. Or another path is the grief of discovering that what felt like destiny was actually a developmental crisis that required you to grow up. Both require you to be honest about which one you are actually in. Once you've moved through the grief, you may find yourself in solitude. But it won't be loneliness, it will be a choice. Once you reach this stage, you are never truly lonely again. Wholeness is a love that fills you from the inside, manifesting in a way that is unlike anything you've ever experienced before. And here is something I've learned. When you reach wholeness, other people's projections feel physically heavy. They feel like a pressure loaded onto your shoulders. So when you finally see yourself clearly, you lose the appetite for being an actor in someone else's internal drama. That solitude becomes a sanctuary. It is where you are finally free from the weight of who others need you to be. But from this place of wholeness, you'll also discover that a new possibility for a relationship opens up. A connection with someone as complete as you are. When two whole individuals meet, the math changes. It's no longer about two halves seeking completion. It's about synergy, where 1 + 1 does not equal 2 but 11. After the high intensity of drama of previous stages, real love can feel strangely quiet. In fact, it might even seem boring. That's because real love feels like peace, and we've become so addicted to the adrenaline of the karmic chase that we mistake peace for a lack of chemistry. But real love isn't a roller coaster, it is presence. It is the ability to witness someone else's experience without trying to fix them, change them, or project your own trauma onto them. That's why the simple presence of someone who isn't projecting anything onto you becomes so precious. It's not boring, it's freedom. In these relationships, past traumas may still surface, but they are healed through safe presence, not through drama. It's the difference between a storm that destroys your house and a steady rain that helps your garden grow. In the twin flame trap, you feel alive only when there is pain or longing. In love, you feel alive because you're finally safe enough to be yourself. This is the ultimate mark of maturity. It is the transition from desperate cry, "I need you to make me feel alive," to the calm clarity of "I feel alive regardless of your presence. I see you exactly as you are and I choose to stay." If you are currently in the middle of this painful twin flame storm, I want you to hear this clearly. Your experience is not a mistake, it is an initiation. But the goal of this initiation is not for you to end up with another person. The goal is for you to end up with yourself. You had to project your unknown parts onto someone else because for some reason you weren't ready to see them in yourself. That person, that twin flame, didn't bring the light to you. They simply reflected what was already yours. The twin flame did not come to complete you. They came to shatter the illusions that were keeping you from being whole. Sometimes the mirror has to break so that you can stop looking at the reflection and start looking at the source. Once you reclaim your projection, the magnetic pull disappears. The drama stops being sacred. It just becomes unnecessary. And as long as you think the light belongs to another person, you will remain a prisoner. But once the mirror is broken, you are finally free to walk toward a love that doesn't hurt. I'm not promising you that the path ahead will be easy, but I can promise you that it will be real. True love, the kind built on presence and choice rather than trauma and extraction, is waiting on the other side of this transition. Don't be afraid of the silence that follows the storm. In that silence, you will finally hear your own voice again. And that is the only union that truly matters.